Hello friends, welcome to Game It Up. My name is Dave and this is a review of Saga of the Moon Priestess on the Nintendo Switch. A review code was very kindly supplied by the publisher, thank you very much. And also a big thank you to everyone for checking us out. If you're new, we'd love for you to join us by hitting that subscribe button as we journey on to that big 2,000 subscriber pizza party. So, what is Saga of the Moon Priestess? People taking a look at the footage will instantly know what game I'm going to compare it to. It's the game that everyone's going to compare it to. It's clear that this game is inspired by the old school top-down Zeldas. This one is most similar to Link's Awakening from my observations. Now, I'm not going to start slagging the game off and accusing it of being a rip-off by any means. In fact, I'm all in favour of Zelda clones. I love Zelda games, and if there's more games in this style, then that's just more games for me to love. I mean, Blossom Tales, for instance, I rate very highly. It's fair to judge this game on its own merits, but I did feel it important to point out what this game is very similar, to give you a broad idea of the game from the get-go. The story begins with the prince investigating a disturbance, only to find himself getting captured by a witch. But alas, the story does not end here, the slow text scroll tells us. You then take control of Sarasa, whose main weapon is a spear, and you set out exploring this land, finding dungeons to clear and bosses to beat. It is what you'd expect. You find your way to the first dungeon, which consists of enemies to fight, puzzles to solve and rooms to navigate. Your map screen will show the rooms you have been in, but finding a dungeon map will show you all of the rooms. The dungeon designs themselves can be a bit confusing at first, but I did get accustomed to them. And of course, each dungeon contains a new item, which is used to solve the puzzles in that dungeon, beat the boss, and access the next area of the overworld. The controls in this game are quite simplistic, using the left stick or D-pad to move, the X button is to use your spear, and the A button is to interact, and the B button is to use your equipped item. The movement I found to be a bit too slow. Not only did it make walking around the dungeons, especially backtracking, a bit tedious, but it affected the combat too, as sometimes an enemy or boss would touch you and it would be very difficult to get away from it before your health was completely drained. The X button being the spear took a bit of getting used to, but it didn't feel natural to have your main attack up there. But there's always the button mapping option on the Switch home screen, I suppose, but it is annoying to have to resort to that. But when it comes to items, it got a bit confusing with the first one you get. It's a power glove that lets you pick up rocks, standard stuff, but the confusing part is you need to have it equipped to do it. Kind of like in the original Link's Awakening. It really is confusing since the A button is usually used to pick up lighter items such as pots. So why do I need to have the glove assigned to the B button in order to be able to pick up rocks with the A button? I know this game is mimicking the style of the older Zelda games, but this shouldn't be happening. The Link's Awakening remake fixed this issue over 4 years ago, and especially since you can only have one item equipped at a time, even though there is a perfectly good Y button there that isn't used at all. There are statues at each dungeon entrance and some in the overworld. These are used to save the game. If you die and you get a game over, you return to the last one you used, but your progress remains until you turn the game off, so don't worry about having to redo stuff. One thing that is a blessing and a curse at the same time is that everything you do seems to be permanent. So it's a blessing that you don't have to refight enemies or complete the same puzzles over and over if you die, but this also relates to the pots in the dungeons too. You know, the ones that give you things like bombs or arrows or health. So it does get a bit light on ammo if you keep failing at the same bosses, but thankfully the bosses that require those items do drop refills during the fights. The overworld itself has plenty of variety between the areas, with the whole game world feeling quite compact. I sadly didn't feel much connection with the world itself, as I had very little character interaction. In fact, when I would defeat a boss, I would get my next heart upgrade and then simply walk out of the dungeon myself. No text to give me guidance, nothing to walk me out of there. not really any fanfare at all that I beat the boss, no reward for beating the dungeon other than the health upgrade. I was simply left to my own devices, so I didn't really get much satisfaction or any feeling that the vanquishing of that great foe has impacted the world in any way. At one point, it looked like I'd begun a trading quest, but there was no real need to return to the central town after I did the first 2 dungeons, and I found myself just heading straight to the next one each time. There are even beads you can collect, which is basically this game's currency, and you know what, I don't know what they're used for. I never actually spent anything during my playthrough of this game. Graphically, I do think this game looks really nice, like it's straight out of the Game Boy Color era. There's a lot of bright colours and each area looks distinctive, the boss designs are interesting, and the second boss genuinely looked terrifying to us in its second phase, in how it looked and moved. The music was pleasant to listen to, although it went completely silent at some of the boss fights for some reason, but I loved the sound effects. It really took me back to the Game Boy and Game Gear era. The game sells for £5.39, but is 20% off until the 13th of February. This isn't too bad a price for what you're getting, but at the same time, you are getting what you pay for. The game did get more interesting as it went on, but then it just ended. There are 5 dungeons in this game, and it didn't take me much more than 3 hours to play the whole thing. Now there is some enjoyment to be had here. The later dungeons especially had some great puzzles and interesting ideas, but sadly a lot of it was stuff I had seen before. I won't spoil anything here, but have a guess in the comments what you have to do in the first phase of the final boss. Just take a wild guess, because it is something you see in a lot of final bosses in Zelda games. The controls felt stiff and slow, the puzzles and designs were very familiar, I didn't have much of a connection with the game's narrative and world, and I just felt like I was wandering from one place to another without feeling like I was leaving any sort of impact on anyone, which, for a top-down action adventure, my favourite part is discovering the world and its people. It's a budget price for a budget experience. It's far from the worst game I've played. I wouldn't even say this game is bad, but you can do far better also. I would suggest saving up a bit more and buying Blossom Tales games instead, but if you're really curious about this one, I don't think you'd regret your purchase for that low price it's asking, but it was a 3-hour experience for me that was okay for the most part, with a few annoyances, and it's sadly not one I will go back to. Thank you so much for watching this review. Is this a game you're interested in trying still? Let me know in those comments down below, and make sure to like and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.